What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Triple Play Fantasy YouTube channel. Here in today's episode, we're breaking down the Seattle Seahawks top 3 Dynasty Fantasy Football targets. It's going to be a doozy, and as you guys can see, we got a little bit of spiciness for you, as I think there could be some change happening in Seattle, and sure to come in potentially 2022. Starting off with the Seahawks, their actual record from 2021, they were 7-10, fourth place in the NFC West, which is very unfamiliar territory for them, as just recently as just a couple years ago, they were contenders in the NFC, and now they look like they're falling apart right before our very eyes. They do have some dynasty assets, though, as we're going to get into right now. DK Metcalf, somebody who, first and foremost, when you think the Seattle Seahawks, he's the first guy that comes to mind, as he ranks 21st in targets per game in 2021 at 7.6, and that was down from 8.1 in 2020. So his targets per game went down in about half a target, and that definitely translated to his average fantasy points per game, as it was 17 in 2020 compared to 14.4 in 2021. Now, the interesting thing about DK Metcalf is all his touchdowns came in 8 games, with 7 of his 11 touchdowns in 3 games. So those games that he obviously scored, he was a big boom for you, but outside of those games, he was very inconsistent and somebody you weren't very much relying on in your lineup week in and week out. And that inconsistency is going to stick with fantasy managers looking to next season. So this is a good time where you could make a trade for DK Metcalf. I think people are dropping him in their dynasty ranks. And now's the time to buy, because last year he was regarded as potentially a top 3 dynasty wide receiver. And now I've seen him ranked anywhere from 5 to 8. And that's definitely a decent sized drop. So if you think he can get back to what he was in 2020, which I do think he can definitely get there, this is probably as good a time to buy DK Metcalf as you could probably get at this point. The next guy, Tyler Lockett. He was wide receiver 8, 16.6 points per game in 2020. He was wide receiver 22 with 14.3 points per game in 2021. So he dropped a couple points per game, but still pretty much the same Tyler Lockett we saw, as he continues to have big games and his dud games. He scored 158 of his 241.4 PPR fantasy points in 6 games this season, or about 65% of his production came in those 6 games. Keep an eye on what happens with Russell Wilson, as I think that's going to tie heavily into his fantasy value. You know that the connection between those two is electric. The passer rating between Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett, Russell Wilson's passer rating is significantly higher to him than compared to anybody else. It's historic. And I do think that Tyler Lockett could take a major hit if Russell Wilson is gone. So that's someone you have to keep an eye on if he's on your rosters and if Russell Wilson isn't there next season. But tying into that, I think Russell Wilson is not a dynasty fantasy football asset for the Seattle Seahawks. I think he's traded. Jalen Hurts is going to go to Seattle, and he's going to be the new quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks in 2022. Now, why do I think this could happen? The Eagles could intrigue Wilson, as they have one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, just according to a bunch of the different metrics you look at for offensive line across various sites, PFF, ESPN, all those sites have Eagles as a top offensive line. You look, they have Devonta Smith, they have Dallas Goedert as some good weapons just to start with, and they're in a big market, so those could appeal to Russell Wilson. You also have $21.5 million in cap space with the Eagles, so they could upgrade on the offensive side of the ball for Russell Wilson. And I think the biggest sell is the Eagles might have the best package the Seahawks could get, as you could give up Jalen Hurts, but the Eagles also have the 15th, 16th, and 19th picks in the 2022 draft. So they have 3 of the top 19 picks. Now, I think a package of those 3 picks plus Hurts could get it done. Maybe they don't have to give up quite that much, but they have the capital to do it. They have the offensive line. They have some skill position players. The Eagles have the bullets in the chamber to be able to execute a trade. I think it's just going to be a question if it happens, and I do think it happens. I do think Russell Wilson is gone from Seattle, and this team seems to make the most logical sense. So Jalen Hurts will be a dynasty fantasy football asset for the Seattle Seahawks in 2022. He's going to be their quarterback and somebody that's going to be a boom for your fantasy team, as you saw what he did with the Eagles in 2021. I think he's the guy. I think he's the Seahawks quarterback. What do you think? Am I crazy for thinking that Jalen Hurts could be the guy in Seattle? Are you buying DK Metcalf? Are you buying Tyler Lockett? Are you selling these guys off? Let me know in the comments below what you think about the top 3 Dynasty fantasy football assets for the Seattle Seahawks. And don't worry, we have one of these for every single team in the NFL coming continually this offseason. And if there's a certain aspect about these picks that you want to see more of, if you want to see a video breaking down in specific guys here, let us know in the comments below. But until then, guys, we'll see you in the next one.